Hello, I'm Chuck Black, and this is the Age of Ingenuity, our weekly chronicle of Canada's current innovation economy. And here's what's happening. The US and China are engaged in an economic battle for world domination using innovative, high-tech multinational corporations as chess pieces and proxies. Those proxies are the same firms that most of Canada's innovation creations are sold to. So if we don't soon pick a side, either China or the US, one of them will pick us.
I'm Alan Calder, and growing up playing chess helps me spot a gambit. Sacrificing a pawn to gain a tactical advantage is crazy or wise? Sacred clowns practice crazy wisdom and exist on the fringes of society, exposing truths and lies through delinquency. Maybe we don't need to take this bait. Maybe we can't afford to play this game.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Brian Orlotti, and I remember the classic Star Trek episode where Spock talked about chess and having no options, and Kirk talked about poker with its ability to bluff and act irrationally, but still win. With that said and done, here are a few of the stories we're currently tracking. And our first piece comes from the New York Times, titled, "U.S. Delivers Another Blow to Huawei with New Tech Restrictions," by Anna Swanson. The Trump administration issued a new rule Friday that will bar Huawei and its suppliers from using American technology and hardware and software, a significant escalation in the White House's battle with the Chinese telecom giant, and one that is likely to inflame tensions with Beijing. The rule change, which is slated to go into effect in September, will block companies around the world from using American-made machinery and software to design or produce chips for Huawei or its entities. Companies can apply for a license to continue supplying those products, but the administration said the presumption would be to deny those requests.
So essentially, we have a new set of rules that will bar Huawei and its suppliers from using American technology and software. And this is perceived of, at least by China, as being a significant escalation in the White House's battle with the Chinese telecom giant, and something that'll likely inflame tensions. What do you guys think?
Speaking of inflamed tensions, I have a question about what happened to that executive from Huawei when it was in Canada in jail.
Still in Vancouver, still awaiting trial.
Why is that still going on then? What are they on trial for? I don't recall the situation, but it sounds like it's a garbage trial, to be honest.
The trial was supposedly over this particular executive using a Huawei subsidiary to sell telecom equipment to Iran.
Sure, that sounds a bit far-fetched, to be honest. Then, it's interesting. We didn't in Canada arrest them for United States problem with them selling equipment.
Agreed. I mean, and even if sanctions were, China is not bound to honor U.S. law and sanctions.
Absolutely not.
And Donald Trump pretty much said openly in a press conference that she's being used as a bargaining chip in trade talks. So It is nonsense.
And to be fair, the Canadians are going along with it. Prime Minister Trudeau is trying to play both sides against the middle right now.
Yeah, I was going to say to Brian, who is China? Who is the U.S. to tell Iran what to do, and China what to do, and Canada what to do, for that matter? We're tied closely to them, but they're not in charge of us.
Agreed, but like Chuck said, we're going along with it because we're in a middle ground between two giants, and we're just trying to straddle the line and not get crushed
and get reelected.
I was going to suggest that these new rules will also push Huawei technology out of countries belonging to the Western Five Eyes Alliance, where at least as noted in the January 30th, 2020 newsroom post, Huawei breaks the Five Eyes firewall. The Chinese company was beginning to make substantial inroads. They were having a certain amount of success in Great Britain. They were having a certain amount of success in Canada. Building up these firewalls between American and Chinese technology seems to be part of the plan to separate the world into two separate internets.
I agree, but I think that the Americans' efforts won't be completely successful. I mean, the most prominent example of that would be recently in the UK, where the uh, the UK has agreed to allow Huawei equipment, 5G equipment in their new 5G network in quote non-strategic areas, end quote, whatever the hell that means.
Yeah.
Um, so there was a setback from Trump's point of view, but also in Canada, I mean, you know, the Canadian government does what Canadians do. They weasel, and they've delayed the ruling on whether Huawei can be part of Canada's 5G networks until the next election cycle, probably.
I agree that the battle is not won nor lost on either side as of now. There's much still to go.
Uh, I agree. It's not. It's just getting started in many ways.
Yeah.
Like the integration of China into our economy in the West is fairly new, relatively. So, you know, like generational wise.
And there are two important factors to remember, at least when it comes to Canada. One, Huawei is very much a part of the of Canada's higher education sector. A lot of Canadian universities, academia are in bed with Huawei, both from a research perspective and their own internal IT infrastructures. A lot of Canadian universities use Huawei equipment, and also for the fact that a significant chunk of Canada's economy depends on Chinese students coming here and spending quadruple what Canadian students spend on tuition.
Didn't we talk about that last week? The big unicorn in the Canadian high tech industry is a website that sets students up in foreign universities.
Yeah.
I would, however, argue that big tech companies are uniquely susceptible to nationalist pressure. And for that, I would reference the May 15th, 2020 TechCrunch post. Foxconn's profits plunged nearly 90% due to the COVID-19 shutdown. I would argue that there's a president and a bunch of C-level people at Foxconn saying, holy crap, we're making 90% less gross than we did 3 months ago. We need a solution. And anybody with money that'll bolster the bottom line, they're in favor of.
Well, who's going to bring the money then, Chuck, do you think?
Well, I would say that the Chinese or the Americans, and to reference that, I would note the May 15th, 2020 TMSC press release. TMSC announces intention to build and operate an advanced semiconductor lab in the United States. TMSC is primarily a Chinese company, and they've been given, I don't know how much it costs to build a chip fabrication facility in the United States. I would imagine anywhere between 3 and 10 or 12 billion US dollars. So at least there's this at least one case we've referenced as of now, which suggests that the United States is going to throw money at companies that locate their physical facilities on their mainland.
Well, that's what I'm suggesting. Is legally they might not see it that way, though. You know, for me, if I was Chinese company, I would be pretty concerned about this sort of talk and opening up and putting money into it in the States personally.
Well, and we're seeing that happening already to a degree. I mean, we're seeing Chinese companies like Alibaba and Tencent pouring billions into CPU and semiconductor research to create homegrown Chinese CPUs and various other kinds of semiconductor chips. There was the article, Chuck, I sent to you regarding that.
Yes, yes.
I forget the name of the CPU, but it is about 2 or 3 generations behind Western CPUs in capability, but you know they can catch up fast.
Well, wasn't the theory that China was just stealing the IP anyway? Well, I thought that was like the big fear that always happened every single time. Wasn't that just the deal?
Well, steal, yes. Also, there was a very interesting piece on Ars Technica a month or 2 ago about how a little known deal between AMD, which is one of the top CPU makers in the world now, if not the top, had a deal with an obscure Chinese company to license the design for the x86 processor architecture, which is the foundation for most CPUs now. And so that top technology is already in Chinese hands. So whether it's bought or reverse engineered or stolen, there are ways to catch up.
Exactly. So why are they so far behind if they're the ones manufacturing these things in the first place? I have a friend of mine who said that if China wants to spy on America or Canada for that matter, or anyone, all of the chips are manufactured in China. They can put whatever they want in them. And
well, actually, it's funny you mentioned that, because there was a big fiasco maybe 6 months to a year ago where Ingram Micro, which is a very large maker of motherboards for servers, was accused of having a chip on the motherboards that would, discreetly copy and retransmit data to a Chinese government server. And multiple independent parties have investigated that allegation and found it was completely without merit. So that thought has occurred to people in the tech industry, but so far it doesn't seem to have panned out. And also, setting aside the technical difficulties with hiding something like that, it is a bit far-fetched.
I don't understand the technology well enough, though, but I do know that they don't trust, the Chinese and the Americans do not trust each other, though, and probably for good reasons.
That's exactly what it is. They don't trust each other. It's paranoia and mistrust on both sides. And I mean, there was, again, I was reading something in the tech press. IBM had sold a mainframe to a Chinese government ministry, and the particular ministry was concerned about the potential for spying, and they had Chinese engineers. They ran the mainframe on an air-gapped system, and were monitoring it through various means to make sure that data was not being sent without their knowledge. So it runs both ways.
I'm going to parse this a little further. I'm going to suggest that the Chinese people have also had a habit of moving their money and tech out of China in order to maintain their options with the Chinese government. That's part of the reason why condos in Vancouver used to cost so much. And I would say there's lots of movements going one way and the other, and the final battle still has yet to be played. But lots of people are distrustful of lots of other people right now.
Yeah,
I agree 100%. You go.
The CCP. That's all would be 100% like admitted virtual communism, as people describe it as, if that's the way it works out. Honestly, Brian, you're 100% correct on that. It's the optics they don't like, not the results.
Yeah, I agree with both of you. You guys are correct. It's the optics. It's not necessarily the end result.
Yeah, and the optics, the optics are what people see, and that's all they care about anyway. Honestly, if you can manage the optics, then you can manage the people.
Yeah. I would also argue that while China and the United States are the major players in this tech game, and India is a minor player, perhaps large enough to stand up to the giants, we in Canada might not be. And
well, it depends how. Sorry, Chuck. It depends how in bed we are with these giants too. Then, right?
Yeah.
Speaking of an Indian company, there's one. Have you heard of Tech Mahindra? It is this this consultancy company from India. They were consulting with Bombardier for their new series of planes that they had working on, and they dumped a lot of cash into it, Tech Mahindra then, and they were right involved with this thing. This is with Canada too, right? And just well, how I point that out, that they're not a small player necessarily. The Tech Mahindra is like $1 billion consultancy company. They're huge. We don't hear about them.
I agree, and I know that at one point they were doing a lot of the engine manufacturing and the testing for Bombardier. But I would also argue that Canada is terribly wrapped up in a lot of American military and high-tech supply chains, and we would have trouble extricating ourselves from that. And I would reference a May 14th, 2020 Defense One post under the title, "Trump Make All F-15 Parts in U.S." DoD spends $1 billion on COVID response, Intelsat bankrupt, and more. And it mostly references the fact that U.S. President Donald Trump said on Thursday that no F-35 parts should be made abroad. I'm sure this is absolutely wonderful news for 130 Canadian component manufacturers in the F-35 program that are expecting, honestly, to make tens of billions of dollars off the program over the next couple of decades. This is a big supply chain that's connected to Canada, and if the U.S. starts opening up factories for landing gear components, Magellan Aerospace in Winnipeg, Manitoba is up the creek without a paddle.
It agreed, and it's the continuation of America first, and the corollary to that is, you know, everyone else last, and it's the problem, in my opinion, with the Donald Trump worldview of the world as a massive zero-sum game, and for us to win, everybody else has to lose, and that is a very self-defeating philosophy, and it's also, you know, what's the term? Soft power.
Yeah.
Building goodwill with your allies, you know, sharing the wealth, you know, making everyone have a stake in the game you're running, in this case, NATO and Western defense. And it's like Chuck said, it's very hard for Canada to get itself out because we're so integrated with the US, and we're paying the price for that now.
Who's to say that we can't run parallel to that as well? Keep that going and do other things besides that.
I agree, but we're not doing it. I completely agree with you, Al, but we're not. Canadians, they just,
I would suggest, I would suggest the Canadian leadership, the business leaders, the government have spent the last 3 or 4 decades explaining that the best way for us to make money is to integrate ourselves into foreign supply chains. That's why we don't make our own cars anymore. That's why we stopped making our own fighter planes in the 1950s. That's why all sorts of really great Canadian high-tech companies like BlackBerry went the way of the dodo. We're perceived of naturally as not having the skill set to build major world-class companies. To be fair, it's so bad that even investors like Omer's, a pension plan in Canada, feels more comfortable investing in American companies than they do in Canadian companies.
It's true. And, you know, all of that, it was a house of cards, and it was a house of cards built on the idea that, you know, the U.S. will always be our friend. And the question nobody ever bothered to answer is, what happens when they're not our friends anymore?
What if they want our water? Are they our friends anymore? When the world runs out of water, are they our best friends anymore?
What happens when they want our minerals or our oil?
I'm going to send a strongly worded letter. I swear to God, so strongly worded that they'll run in fear.
Yeah, it's the Canadian way.
I think, to be fair, the Canadians will be asked nicely initially, and then the Prime Minister will retreat to his summer cottage, and then the Americans will take what they want.
Merci beaucoup, he'll say.
It's sad.
It's sad. But true.
Well, you go.
No one. Why? The problem is we're letting it happen. Like almost every story that we cover is, I think to myself, it's governed by the consent of the governed. We let it happen. We let him go to his cottage when he tells us we can't go to our cottage, and then we hate our neighbor for going to their cottage, but they can do whatever they want. Rules for thee, but not for me, kind of society. And we're okay with that. It's our fault, not his fault, that we suck so bad.
Well, it's like you said. If the day ever comes when American tanks cross the border, we'll write a very sternly worded letter.
Oh, I agree.
I don't even think it's going to be a question of tanks crossing the border. I think at some point, if we keep trying to integrate ourselves into the American supply chain, or even if we decide we're going to integrate ourselves into the Chinese supply chain or even the Indian supply chain, at some point, given the current circumstances, it's going to be extremely difficult for Canada to maintain any sort of independent national foreign policy. It's going to be extremely difficult for us to keep our IP and build innovative corporations. And it's going to be difficult for us to do anything except work part-time at the Gap.
Well, there is a story that gives me hope for what Canada could do if it set its mind to it. The story of Nokia from Finland. Nokia, one of the largest telecom equipment makers in the world, big player in wireless, microwave transmission equipment, and cellular technology all the way back from 1G to 2.5G, all the way up to 5G now. They declined, were bought up by Microsoft. Microsoft didn't really do anything with them, and a group of former Nokia employees bought back the company using their own money and reshaped them into, again, a leading player in telecom, new cell phones. They're a player in 5G tech. Smaller players don't have to, they can punch above their weight when they want to. And those are the stories we're covering this week. As always, the articles we've referenced are listed in the show notes below. Keep in touch with us on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Minds, and Gab.
If you'd like to promote your event or activity, or if you think you have insight into Canada's current innovation economy, please send me an email. I'm at chuck.black@protonmail.com.
And we're currently on YouTube, BitChute, and Vimeo, and hope to be on other platforms soon. If you want to support our program, we're on Patreon, and if you want to sponsor us, send an email to Chuck at the address listed on the screen.
And that's all for this week. We'll be back next week with more stories covering our current age of ingenuity.